Not live yet.
Hello, and welcome to Joe and Kat Chats. Today we're talking about a global issues update. If you have not caught us talking about global issues before, you can check out episodes 12, 12 and a half, and 21. But today we're talking about the recent stuff going on around the world. We're recording live here on Facebook and YouTube. It is March 2nd, 2021. And you can find us on all socials at Joe and Kat Chats or on personal pages at Joe Nice DJ and at CatWells22. So the other thing is we're always happy to be a part of Tastemakers Radio on Dash Radio. So listen every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And with that said, I'm excited to get into our topic today. But first, how are you, Joe?
You know what, Miss Wells? It is what it is. I'm here. I'm alive. I am maintaining high standards of Blackness and humanity at all times. As you can see on this channel and on the screen, for those watching, you're seeing some of the new merchandise, some of the new garments, if you will. Joe Nice Network materials. You got the fresh beanie out to my guys at the Edge Print promo shop. We're cooking up all sorts of things in the kitchen. Merchandise is coming soon. The amount of stuff that I've got planned. And by the way, there will be Joe and Kat Chats merchandise. That is coming. Do not fear. If you want Joe and Kat Chats merchandise, be patient. It takes time to put all this stuff up, but it's happening. And when we have it, the world will know, and we're going to get it out there for everybody to have. So if you want to wear it at the gym, if you want to go to your festivals and wear Joe and Kat Chats material, we've got you covered. Hold tight. We've got you. How are you?
Amazing. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Keeping it fresh. That's amazing.
Always,
Thank you, Joe.
Always.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. I haven't seen anything yet, but I'm happy to see your Joe Nice Network stuff. The beanie is looking really cool. For those who can't see, who are listening on the radio or on podcast, it is looking good.
The t-shirt's fresh, by the way. Your copy of the Four Fights t-shirt, it's in the mail. It's on the way. You already got a sneak preview of that. The Four Fight shirt, Humanity, Freedom, Equality, and Survival. That shirt's fresh. That's going to be printed up. We've got loads of stuff coming, and the merchandise is out here. How are you? How's life?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think it's been a busy day for both of us, but yeah, a busy, frantic morning for me. But yeah, I'm excited to get into this. As always, we're here once a week, and we're always on time. And so, yeah, I think it's an amazing thing that we get to do this every week. So.
Absolutely. You know what? One quick correction. I don't know if we're always on time, but we're always on schedule. And I think
that is fair.
There is a subtle difference because we weren't on time today, but we're definitely on schedule.
That is totally fair. Thank you for pointing that out.
That's no problem. No problem. As you know, as I've been want to do in recent weeks, I'd like to start each show with a quote or a song lyric, not only to set the tone, but to provide a backbone for what we're going to be talking about today. And you know, a couple of weeks back, we had Men in Music, and we talked about one of the greatest songwriters and singers of all time, Marvin Gaye. So we're going to go back to Marvin Gaye again off the Let's Get It On album, which I think came out in 1975 or 1976. He had a song called Where Are We Going? Okay? The first verse of the song says, day in, day out, sidewalk sleepers turn about. Day by day, the work gets done. Day by day, another war goes on. Tell me, where are we going? What's the future showing? Oh, where are we headed? With all that's going on, where are we getting? Marvin Gaye wrote that 45 years ago. Where are we going? What's the future showing? With all that's going on, what are we getting? And this is what we are going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about, to borrow a phrase from Marvin Gaye again, we're going to talk about what's going on, more specifically with global issues. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to discuss. And we have a limited time to do all of this stuff. So we're going to begin with the proceedings. Kat, by the way, I forgot, this is global. And, I left my passport over there in the desk by the bed. I had the British passport now. I've got the U.S. passport, working on a couple of other passports. We're going to talk about that in a private conversation.
Very cool. Yeah.
But, we're in we're on the airplane now. We got, big first class seats, all the olives we can eat, all of the port wine we can drink. As well as where are we off to first?
I actually wanted to start off with a conversation that is just global in and of itself. Because there are 130 countries around the world that don't have access to vaccines for COVID-19.
Correct.
And they will not have access for the foreseeable future because of patent laws and basically greed and hoarding by the West, which, the quote-unquote global North. So 85 of the poorest countries in the world will not have access to the vaccines until 2023. And think about that. It is the first
hold on.
It's the first 3 months now of 2021.
Kat, hold on a second. Repeat that, please.
So 85 of the poorest countries in the world will not have access to the vaccines until 2023. And the projections are not saying that they're going to get it in January of 2023. This is late 2023. So, I thank you for asking me to repeat that, because I think that's something that really needs to sink in, because I've had a lot of conversations lately with people who are, mentioning or just talking about feeling the impact of the 1 year mark of COVID-19, because many of our countries implemented, restrictions and whatever in March of 2020. So it's around the 1 year mark, and people are feeling it. People are exhausted. The death rate is exceedingly shocking and horrifying and saddening. And so when we're talking about the vaccine, a lot of people tend to talk about how it's sort of exciting that it's going to be implemented. And, after that, there's this sense of normalcy that people assume will come back. But this is not the case for poor countries.
I'm going to make sure I'm going to digest and absorb everything you just said. There are 130 countries around the world, and depending upon which measurement or metric you want to use, there's either 193 or 206 countries, depending on whichever metric you want to use. But 130 of whatever amount of countries you believe there are on planet Earth do not have the vaccine now, and will not have access to the vaccine until sometime in 2023.
Yeah.
We are, let's see, today is March 2, so 31, 28, 59, 60. We are 61 days into calendar year 2021. And they're not talking next year. They're talking the year after next. So another 1,000 days from now, realistically, is when these 85 of the poorest countries are looking to get the vaccine.
Yeah, whether they can even afford
it or not. Okay, now, Kat, obviously you know about this. We have a couple of viewers that are chiming in and with a commentary out to Deep Sound saying, "Evening, Joe and Kat." Out to Charlie Menton, what's going on? Out to main man Sam, he's saying disgusting. I agree, it is disgusting. Out to Thomas Vander saying big up Joe and Kat, spit the truth. Absolutely. Now, I'm gonna make sure we understand this. Now, about, let's say 8-9 weeks ago, we did an episode called Capitalism and the HDI. We did colonialism, and we did another episode about 5 to 6 weeks ago called Vaccine Apartheid. Mm-hmm. Take a look at everything you just said. it speaks to everything we talked about in those 3 previous episodes, especially not only the vaccine apartheid episode, but the capitalism and HBI episode. Because clearly, when you talk about this vaccine, and the countries that already have access to the vaccine are probably countries that are higher on the HDI scale, that have higher HDI scores, and the poorer countries are probably countries that have lower scores on the HDI. Or if we flip that around, there was another metric that we discussed in that show called the Fragile State Index. So countries that have a low fragile state score are countries that have a higher score on the Human Development Index. And the opposite of that would also be true. So countries that have a high fragile state score would also be low on the Human Development Indices. There's this is, I'm not going to say I'm surprised nor shocked. I'm disappointed. I am disappointed in humanity. I am disappointed in these vaccine manufacturers that aren't doing anything to make sure that, as I've said in the past, the least of these get the opportunity to be vaccinated. And the only way we are going to be able to reduce and eliminate this global pandemic is to make sure that all approximately 8 billion people who live on this beautiful planet Earth get the vaccine.
Yeah, those who can take it. Yeah, for sure. And so, you touched on exactly the point I wanted to make with this as well, is just like, this is so tied to capitalism and economics.
Yes.
That it's kind of gross to talk about, because what's really preventing the widespread dissemination of these vaccines is, these companies that have approved vaccines are not able to make them fast enough, but that's because of patent laws.
Correct.
Because they're corporations and they need to make money. And so if you're preventing the sharing of the process for making the vaccine, because there are facilities around the world that have the equipment and the capacity to produce more vaccines, but these companies are not willing to do that because of political and economic reasons, which mostly have to do with shareholders.
Correct.
And so, to be fair, it's a lot more complicated than we're making it sound, because it's not like you can just send the ingredient list and the recipe to a facility and they can make it all the way through. It's various places that are involved here. But the cost of the vaccine is also a hindrance because many of these poor countries literally cannot afford to pay for the vaccine for their citizens, because they don't have the GDP in order to do that, or they don't have tax revenue like those of us in North America do. So one of the people I'm really lucky to be able to work with is someone by the name of Dr. Fala, who lives in Liberia. And he did a podcast recently that I listened to, and he basically just laid it out. He said, the West needs to, it has a responsibility to help the rest of the world obtain the vaccine and disseminate it, because a lot of these countries can't afford to buy it when it does become available in 2 years.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot wrapped up in this.
Absolutely. There's some more comments. We're going to discuss some of these comments here. Charlie Mentom saying, so why aren't we seeing new charities to try and fund this? I've noticed an increase in charity ads during lockdown, but no mention of this. Charlie, there's a good reason for this. There's a wonderful documentary that I remember having to watch during the first time of graduate school. It's called Poverty Inc. Poverty Inc. You can watch that. There's a trailer on YouTube. You can watch it on Netflix. And it essentially discusses how the nonprofit industrial complex isn't really in the business of solving people's problems. They're in the business of making sure that they have well-funded, decent paying jobs with really good benefits to ensure their own existence and to maintain their status quo. Yeah. So that's the reason why I think you aren't seeing new charities to try to fund this. Additionally, COVID-19 has taken a sledgehammer to fundraising for nonprofits. And one of these days, Kat, I think we're going to do an entire episode on nonprofits, which is kind of something I know a little bit about.
You do,
yeah, just a small little bit. Just a bit. And we're going to talk about the 9 different ways that nonprofits can raise revenue. And many of those ways that nonprofits can raise revenue have been dramatically hindered and and slowed down as a result of the economic shutdown from the COVID-19 pandemic. So you're going to see an increase in charity ads during lockdown because, quite honestly, there's a whole lot of people that are home, and the visibility is going to increase naturally. But you're not necessarily going to see new charities because there's fewer people that have the financial wherewithal and the disposable income to contribute to a new charity. So in many instances, you're going to see a lot more. Quite honestly, the nonprofit industrial complex isn't that much different than corporations. When you think about the nonprofit industrial complex, what you're going to see is these legacy nonprofit institutions that are going to continue to get a lion's share of donations and in-kind gifts as a result of, instead of new companies or new nonprofits, I should say, that are going to be willing to take on more donations, because it takes time to start up a nonprofit. It takes time to get these donations. There's a process for soliciting funds. It's called the cultivation process. And there's a book that I have over here about nonprofits. It's an entire 2 chapters about that. And it takes time to go through the cultivation process to find out how you can get money from organizations, trusts, foundations, and quite honestly, rich people. And moreover, rich white people. More specifically, rich white guys. So let's even take another step further into this. I'll be willing to bet you, Kat, that of these 130 countries that have not been able to get the vaccine, 85 of them are probably in countries where the people look more like me rather than you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a really good possibility or probability or propinquity that many of these nonprofits or charities or corporations or charitable organizations are funded by people who look more like you, Kat, rather than like me.
You right again, Joe.
So what I'm getting at, implicitly and now explicitly, is that there is obvious racism with regards to the distribution of this vaccine. And we had an entire episode on this called Vaccine Apartheid. Please watch it. Please listen to it. There's a lot to be gained from that episode. Sam saying, we, the UK, have bought something like 3 times the amount of our population already, and we're still buying more. Yes, we talked about that in the episode. It's called vaccine hoarding.
Yeah, and actually I have a story that applies to both of these comments too. And it's probably applicable to your country and mine and the UK because Justin Trudeau came out and I mean, Canada ordered too many vaccines for the number of people in our population. And he basically said that the extras will just go to foreign aid. Basically, we're going to ship them to the quote unquote poor people, which, I mean, that's what I'm saying we need to do in essence, but it's still a way of vaccine hoarding because you're ensuring that the rich people in Canada are getting the vaccine first, and then the poor people get it as a secondary thing. And that's highly problematic. And it also speaks to sort of the flip side of what you were saying with nonprofits and NGOs, Joe, because there is an entire industry of how you can get money from NGOs, like when you are in a poor country. And so it's like this interesting balance because, I mean, a lot of these countries have built their political systems surrounding the money that is coming in from foreign aid. And so it's this vastly complex thing that has a lot of strings and pushes and pulls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this goes to another comment that we have from Sam saying, and we are justifying it by saying anything left over will be given to poorer countries, basically. And we are going to buy a shitload, and you can have our leftovers once we are okay. This is exactly what you just talked about. And Kat, you couldn't have seen this comment because, again, it's on my side, not yours. So
yeah. So thank you. We're on the same level, Sam.
There it is. And then Sam once again saying we should be giving the vaccine immediately as opposed to an afterthought with our leftovers. Absolutely. Charlie checking in saying, how do we know that shipping vaccines to poor countries won't cause problems in their country by corrupt governments using it for profit and power? Charlie, that is a brilliant comment. And Kat, if you'll allow me to transition into the next topic that we want to talk about, because Charlie, this is something that I think is going to be applicable to the comment you just posted and going to tie in and really dovetail to everything you talked about, Kat, is the situation with the vaccine between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Israel has 9 million people, and the vaccine rollout has been swift. In fact, if you look at many of the independent studies for vaccine distribution and vaccine spread throughout the world, Israel has done the best job with distributing the vaccine. Now, Israel has also created digital passports for those who have been vaccinated and those who have not. Now, what I'm going to get into is going to get a little bit deep, and it's going to tie into another topic that we wanted to discuss. Now, there is a company called NSO. They're an Israeli security company. Now, NSO created a tracking software or hacking software called Pegasus. You're like, I've heard about this from someone. I heard about this. Now, one of the people we are going to talk about today is a murdered Saudi journalist named Jamal Khashoggi. Now, the software that was used to find his exact location when he went into the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, Turkey, was Pegasus. And Pegasus was the software now that this is the same group, the NSO, that wants to get involved with creating this tracing software, this contract tracing software for the COVID-19 pandemic in Israel. I'm going to make sure I say this all again. The same company that created a tracking software for iPhones to spy on journalists is now the same company that wants to be involved with contact tracing for COVID-19 in Israel and other companies that are willing to pay Israel a handsome sum for the rights to that proprietary software. Just want to make sure you're aware of all of this. Now, of the 9 million people in Israel, 1.5 million are Palestinians that are living inside of Israeli borders with Israeli citizenship and Palestinian citizenship. Now, these are Israeli borders based upon 1948, the year 1948 geographic subdivisions. However, there are 5 million Palestinians that live between the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Palestine. Now, under international law, Israel is responsible for the occupied populations. Now, you're probably like, well, Joe, how do we know this? Where are you getting this information from? I'll be happy to share that with you. Now, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Fourth Geneva Convention discusses humanitarian protections for civilians in a war zone. Humanitarian protections for civilians in a war zone. Part 3, Section 3, Article 56 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Now, Part 3 talks about the status and treatment of protected persons. Section 3 talks about occupied territories. And Article 56 discusses hygiene and public health. States, to the fullest extent of the means available to it, the occupying power has the duty of ensuring and maintaining, with the cooperation of local and national authorities, the medical and hospital establishments and services, public health and hygiene in the occupied territory, with particular reference to the adoption and application of the prophylactic and any preventative measures necessary to combat the spread of contagious diseases and epidemics. Medical personnel of all categories shall be allowed to carry out their duties, end quote. So, the Israeli health minister in an Israeli newspaper called Mondoweiss, and he said this on January 21, 2021, said, and I'm somewhat paraphrasing, said that Israel's obligation to vaccinate Palestinians is akin to vaccinating dolphins in the Mediterranean. Essentially, Israel's health minister is basically saying, we don't need to vaccinate all these Palestinians. We're only concerned about Israelis. Now, the West Bank's population is 3 million people. Israel has only authorized 2,000 doses to the West Bank. Gaza has a population of 2 million people. 2,000 doses to Gaza. Israel has a blockade on Gaza. And Israel right now, to go with what Charlie was speaking about earlier, Israel is using the blockade as using the vaccine as a bargaining chip to force Gaza into making political changes. There's more. Now, go ahead, Kat. Go ahead.
I mean, it's just so disgusting already. So I'm just kind of stuck on the, an elected official or an appointed official, comparing Palestinians to animals, just like Trump compared, migrants on the southern border of the US to animals. And this is just like a political move to dehumanize human beings that are literally suffering and just trying to, exist.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that.
There's more to this, because whenever you have an occupier country that tries to control an occupying country by using some sort of means to control that population, that is what's called collective punishment. And collective punishment is a war crime. Now, under that same Fourth Geneva Convention, there's Section 1, Article 33. And this says that no protected person may be punished for any offense he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or of terrorism are prohibited. Now, what we're seeing here is clearly a continuation of medical apartheid and the continual illegal occupation of Palestine and of the Gaza Strip and of the West Bank. What we're seeing here, in addition to the already well-documented crimes against humanity that Israel continues to inflict upon the people of Palestine, the people of the West Bank, and the people of Gaza, we're seeing Israel commit another war crime by purposely sequestering the distribution of the vaccine in these 3 protected territories. And clearly, Israel has gone ahead and said that they are occupying those 3 spaces: Palestine, Gaza Strip, West Bank. According to international law, if you have an occupied territory, you're essentially responsible for their medical treatment. And if these facilities or these places don't have the facilities to take care of their population's medical needs, it's incumbent upon the people who are doing the occupying to make sure trained professionals go into those territories to make sure that personnel of all categories are allowed to carry out their duties. So what needs to happen is more attention needs to be placed on this.
Yeah.
Just as much attention as we are seeing with regards to the 130 countries that do not have the access to the vaccine, or the 85 poorest countries that will not have access to the vaccine until 2023. The Palestinian people deserve to have the vaccine just as much as any of those people in the 85 poorest countries, the other 45 countries that make up the rest of the 130 countries that don't have the vaccine, and the other 85 to 90 countries around the world that have already had access to the vaccine.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's I mean, like just such a blatant display of medical apartheid, and I mean, although Israel is not a country or an administration or whatever that's going to follow any human rights guidelines, because they break them all the time. It is something that we need to be talking about, and we need to be putting pressure on our governments to put pressure on that government.
Perfect. I thoroughly and unequivocally agree with you, Kat. This needs to happen. We have a few more people in the chat. Out to Thomas Vandervander saying Abby Martin touched on this. Abby Martin is a genius. She's one of the best journalists ever.
Yeah, agreed.
Mayman Eugene saying greetings. That sounds fishy, but I'm not surprised. Speaking of Thomas's quote Thomas's post. He said Abby Martin touched on this, and I mentioned Jamal Khashoggi. If you don't mind, Kat, I'd like to discuss him next. This kind of makes it like a reasonable transition.
Yes.
Now, this past weekend, Jamal Khashoggi, there was a report that the United States wrote up, and it basically said that the United States figured out that a Saudi protective force was involved in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Now, the USA did not sanction Saudi Arabia with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Many of you are saying, well, Joe, who's Jamal Khashoggi? Why should he matter? Jamal Khashoggi is a reporter for the Washington Post, which is one of the quote unquote papers of record in the United States. He covered the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in the 80s. He was quite close to the royal Saudi Arabian family, and then had a falling out with them because of his criticism of the Saudi Arabian government and their human rights abuses. So on his own volition, he self-exiled to the United States of America. Now, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia is a gentleman named Mohammed bin Salman. We will use the abbreviation MBS for short to save a little bit of time during the conversation. MBS. And MBS had Khashoggi assassinated in Istanbul. Now, why was Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul? Jamal Khashoggi was in Istanbul because his fiancée is a Turkish lady. And he went to the Saudi embassy to get a divorce certificate proving that he was divorced so he could go ahead and marry his new Turkish fiancée. Khashoggi entered the facility but never came out. MBS's security force, a security force known as the Rapid Intervention Force, murdered Khashoggi and dismembered his body into pieces and got rid of the pieces of his slain body. Now, why was he killed? He was killed because he spoke out against the human rights violations that are taking place in Saudi Arabia. Now, the United States government determined that there was a planned attack with the help of, if you remember what I mentioned about 10 minutes ago, that Israeli software known as Pegasus, which allows remote surveillance via the iPhone. Now, Jamal Khashoggi is not the first person to have their iPhone hacked by Pegasus. There were dozens of journalists, especially Al Jazeera journalists, that had their phones tapped. Now, this software was also used to track Khashoggi. The NSO group, which is that Israeli group that wants to be involved with contact tracing with the Israeli government and other companies that are willing to work with the NSO group, also created that software. Now, what did the USA do? The USA said, hey, you know what? We'll freeze the assets of MBS's security detail, the Rapid Intervention Force, and there's about 15 or 20 of these people who work at the behest of MBS, and they don't take orders from anybody else but MBS. So when MBS said, hey, go ahead and kill Khashoggi, those orders, none of those people went rogue. Those orders came directly from Mohammed bin Salman. They froze the assets of MBS's security detail and banned the entry into the United States of 76 Saudis. Crazily enough, the person that ordered the hit on Jamal Khashoggi, Mohammed bin Salman, was not banned. He's still allowed to come into the United States. Jamal Khashoggi was a United States resident. Now, Donald Trump, when he was president from 2017 until about a month and a half ago, did nothing about this. Joe Biden last week issued a travel ban and an asset freezing for the Rapid Intervention Force. Bear in mind, this is the same Biden administration that wanted to extradite Julian Assange, who is an Australian citizen that told the world about the United States war crimes, and he wants to extradite Julian Assange out of the Belmarsh prison in London, England, which is one of the most horrific prisons in the world, to extradite him back to the United States so we can spend a potential 175 years behind bars. And Julian Assange has already died. This is the same Biden administration that went ahead and sat on their hands when one of their allies, Saudi Arabia, kills a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, that spoke out against the Saudi Arabian government. I want people to understand what kind of what was actually happening here. This is a giant middle finger to journalism, and this is two enthusiastic thumbs up to censorship. And wait a minute, where have we talked about this? We talked about this in episode 30 of the Joe and Kat Chat series, and an episode titled The Future Moving Forward. We talked about how censorship and how the media and how technology is going to play a massive role in 2021. Look at everything that I just spent the past 12 or 13 minutes discussing. Pegasus, MBS, software, Washington Post, journalism, censorship, Assange. That we talked about these three topics 7 or 8 weeks ago in our episode. We're saying, you know what? We're going to rub the crystal cake and see what's on tap and see what the future looks like. Sure enough, look at what's happening. Now, why did the U.S. not freeze MBS's assets? They have every reason to freeze his assets. He ordered the hit on Jamal Khashoggi. His assets should be frozen. There should be sanctions. Why did the U.S. do nothing? Because Mohammed bin Salman is a customer. I'm going to say that again. He is a customer. Mohammed bin Salman buys weapons from the United States of America to kill people in Yemen. I'm going to say that again, Cap. Mohammed bin Salman buys weapons from the United States to kill people in Yemen. He bought $415 billion with a B dollars of weapons during the Obama administration, all 8 years from 2008 until 2016. Under Trump, MBS bought another $300 billion of weapons from 2016 until 2020. Now, what about oil prices? What about dictating energy prices? Of course, the United States wants to continue to have control over the global oil markets and energy markets, and ultimately control over the fossil fuel industry. What better way to do that than to essentially pay hush money to Saudi Arabia and sell Saudi Arabia weapons so they can go ahead and continue genocide in Yemen and to continue massive amounts of human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. The United States, even though they wrote this report, they're just as complicit in Jamal Khashoggi's murder as Mohammed bin Salman or the Rapid Intervention Force.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. And yeah, for those who aren't listening or aren't watching, I was nodding my head through all of that because it is so true, and it is horrendous what Saudi Arabia does as far as human rights violations, as far as the mass genocide they're imposing upon Yemen. And it's all in the name of the military-industrial complex in the United States. That's why they're an ally. That's why they continue to be, basically bros, the leaders. There's so much money involved because the U.S. and Saudi are just, together in the war machine. They perpetuate it, they control it in a lot of ways. They're sharing the benefits of it. And yeah, I mean, there's so much more to be said. We could probably talk about this for an entire episode. But you did mention oil, and one thing that I wanted to talk about was Nigeria, because
real quick, Cap. One other thing about this. We're going to talk about Jamal Khashoggi in a bit more detail when we do our whistleblowers episode in about 3 weeks. And we're going to talk about Jamal Khashoggi. We're going to speak about Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning. We're going to speak about Gary McKinnon. We're going to speak about, obviously, Julian Assange. We're also going to speak about another Saudi Arabian journalist named Raif Badawi, who is sitting in jail right now because he spoke out against the Saudi Arabian government. Raif Badawi. If you want to do a little research, a little homework, you're not going to be tested on it. We might have a little pop quiz just for fun, but if you want to do a little research about Raif Badawi in preparation for, I think this would be episode number 40 or 41, the whistleblowers episode, by all means, please do so, because we love an educated following. We love to make sure that our people that watch our show know what we're talking about, and they know what they're talking about before we dissect and absorb and have these sorts of conversations on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I know we're both looking forward to that episode when when we started discussing future episodes. That one was an exciting one for both of us. So
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Now, Kat, you said about Nigeria. I sorry to interrupt.
So-
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Nigeria is a country that is also heavily reliant on oil economically. And I mean, because of COVID-19 and because of other global factors, of course, I mean, the price of oil has not been doing so hot the last few years. Now, as far as the global issues aspect of this, Nigeria is experiencing a really high number of abductions, and it's in part because of the economic, trying times because of the oil prices being low. And so, like mid-February, there was 42 people, including 27 students, who were abducted from a school in north central state of Nigeria.
Nigeria, yes.
And this, so one boy was actually killed, and they spent 10 days in captivity. They were released on February 27th. And this was a day after another raid on a school in Nigeria's Zamfara state happened, where 300 students were held captive for much less time. But I mean, this is just part of the global issues aspect, because kidnappings are a major issue in this region of the world, and they're increasing in frequency because of the dire economic situation, and that's, I mean, the slump in crude oil prices globally contributes to that. And so I just wanted to point out that, all of these things we're talking about today kind of have an economic, I guess, tie, because I mean, if you're poor, you can't afford the vaccine. If you're poor, you're probably, maybe you're poor because you're in, Palestine and in an occupied state, or you're being, genocide is being imposed upon you if you're in Yemen. I don't mean to laugh. It's a serious issue, but I mean, it's just, there are threads that tie all of these things together, and it's something we talk about all the time here on Joe and Kat Chats, and I just want to be, clear that this is a major thing that we need to be paying attention to and talking about a lot, which is why we do talk about it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to kind of give you a brief update on the situation in Nigeria, and again, and as I'm sure many and many of the people watching know, I've said this somewhat facetiously, that I watch a quote unquote unhealthy amount of news on a day-to-day basis between France 24, DW, TRT, World. There's got my computer here, and there's always something on. Those approximately 300 students that were abducted recently, they were returned today.
Oh, good. Okay.
They were returned today, it actually happened, I say, sometime earlier this morning, my time, which means, I guess, early in the afternoon in Nigeria time, which I think is Central Europe time. So they're 5 hours ahead of me and 8 hours ahead of you. But be that as it may, this is not the first time when students have been abducted from Nigeria. If you remember the Chibok situation in Nigeria during the Obama administration, where Michelle Obama held that to the side and said, "Bring back our girls." And in many instances, these abductions have been a result of particular terror cells in Nigeria, most specifically Al-Shabaab, which supposedly has ties to Al-Qaeda. And there are also certain cells, terrorist cells of ISIS and ISIL, that have also been involved with the abduction of these school children, most of them being young girls. And in the refugees episodes that we've done, we've talked about child abductions, children becoming child soldiers. We've discussed this, and nobody should be taken against their will and be made a hostage or a captive or an indentured servant. Nobody wants to see that. But that type of situation becomes considerably worse when it involves young children, especially young girls who are more susceptible to rape and other types of sexual assault and acts of FGM, which is female genital mutilation, and young boys who eventually become indoctrinated to become child soldiers. It's, and again, as you so eloquently said, sister, you said that it's based upon economics. Think about everything that we've been talking about for the better part of 39 weeks or 40 weeks now regarding the Joe and Kat Chat series and racism. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Racism is a function of economics. Racism is a function of economics. Libya has an open slave trade market right now. There's no telling that if these children were never found, they could have been part of a potential slave trade.
Yeah.
Or potentially migrants that eventually have to find some sort of safe haven or safe space or place to survive. And they realize they can't do that in other countries in Africa. So they will climb onto a small dinghy or some small type of waterborne vessel to traverse the dangerous waters of the Mediterranean and hopefully make it across alive to Malta, some Greek island, or somewhere in Italy. Just yesterday, there was a boat full of refugees that capsized and sunk. And I think all 12 refugees died on that boat. So the situation in Nigeria, and Nigeria, as you said, is an oil-rich country and also a highly corrupt country. If you look at many of the anti-corruption indices involved, Nigeria ranks quite low on the corruption scale because there's a lot of corruption that takes place there. It's a sad situation to see Nigeria because Nigeria is one of the most populated countries in the world and could have a GDP that's incredibly high if the oil infrastructure and, quite honestly, the government was more supportive regarding not only protecting their people, but making sure that the businesses thrive so everybody has equality. It's a shame to see this. It's a shame to hear this. And I'm happy that the students were returned, but the students should have been never taken in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So they should have never been taken in the first place. Something that I want to talk about with regards to kids and refugees and traveling is the situation involving Shamima Begum. And some of you might not have heard of Shamima Begum, and we're going to talk about her for a few minutes. Now, Shamima Begum was born in the United Kingdom, just like somebody that's involved in this chat. That would be me. Now, she left for Syria at the age of 15 in 2015. She became a member of the Islamic State. She got married at that age. Shamima Begum found out she was pregnant at the age of 15, and that baby died at a young age. She then got pregnant twice, and both of her other children died under Islamic State rule. She then wanted to return to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom government said, no, you can't come back here. No way, we don't want you. She said, why? They said, because you are deemed to be a terrorist, you are part of the Islamic State, and we are revoking your United Kingdom citizenship. Get out, don't come back. She appealed that decision, and the appeals court upheld the decision. Her husband is from the Netherlands. The Netherlands wants nothing to do with Shamima Begum. She also went ahead and tried to get citizenship in Bangladesh because Shamima Begum's father is from Bangladesh. Bangladesh wants nothing to do with Shamima Begum. So right now, you have a 21-year-old woman who is married, who wants to return to the United Kingdom, but cannot do so because the UK government revoked her citizenship. She is no longer a member of the Islamic State. She has made that quite clear and apparent in not only court proceedings, but several documents and interviews that she has done in the past. But the UK government does not want her in their country at all. This is me editorializing a little bit, but I have a feeling that if Shamima Begum, who clearly looks Middle Eastern, and if Shamima Begum looked like you, Kat, I would be willing to bet you that they would have said, okay, you know what? Okay, fine. You joined ISIS, but you're the Islamic State, but we know you're not there now. We know you had 3 kids at a young age. You're married to a Dutch gentleman. Okay, we'll let you back into our country. But because she's of a darker complexion and her father is from Bangladesh and she joined the Islamic State but then left the Islamic State, she is now stateless. According to British law, if you have a citizenship hearing and the UK revokes your citizenship, they cannot, by process of citizenship revocation, leave you stateless. I'm going to say that again. The British government, if they have a citizenship revocation hearing and the revocation of UK citizenship renders you, the person that wants to have their citizenship restored, stateless, the British government can't make you stateless. So right now, the English government is breaking their own immigration laws by making sure that Shamima Begum remains stateless because she can't go back to the UK. The Netherlands doesn't want anything to do with her. And Bangladesh, they're like, hands off. We don't want to touch her. She's radioactive. So Shamima Begum right now, 21 years old, married, and is now stateless.
That's what an incredible story in the sense that it's like incredibly upsetting and sad. I think of myself when I was 15, like you're young, you're impressionable. Like what else would you do? I mean, of course, you know, people avoid making bad decisions like joining ISIS or, you know, whatever. But when you're in a state and you're just like being married off at 15 years old and, you know, like the circumstances surrounding this need to be considered. And that's like, you're 21, like I was still young and impressionable at 21 and she's just trying to get citizenship. She's lost 3 children. What a horrendous thing to have to go through. And now she's, you know, still having to fight just to live somewhere that is not dangerous for her because if she's left the Islamic State, then it's probably dangerous for her to remain in Syria.
Yes. And we discussed this, I think, in the first episode of the refugees episode, where if you're a refugee and you try to get what's called repatriated, essentially going to what's called a third-party country because you meet the criteria for becoming a refugee, which is a well-founded fear of persecution based upon religion, gender, nationality, political affiliation. There's one other criteria. I can't remember exactly what it is, but those are the 4 main ones. And a country that takes you in says, oh, you know what? No, we don't want you anymore. You got to go back. That is, again, another human rights violation. It's a French word called refoulement. It's spelled REFOULEMENT. And essentially that means where you are a refugee and you get sent back to the country from whence you came, putting you in harm's way. That is a crime against humanity. Yeah. And the British government needs to be taken to task for this. Because if she is in a camp in Syria, after she went to Syria to join the Islamic State, gets out of the Islamic State, and tries to go back to England, and England says no, and then sends her back to Syria, she is in harm's way, she is in danger, and the international community should be doing more to advocate for Shamima Begum and her husband to make sure that she by birthright has the right to return to the United Kingdom because she was born there. She automatically has citizenship. I should know about that because I was born in England, so I automatically have citizenship in the United Kingdom. She should have just as much opportunity to return to whatever city in England she wants to live in, just like yours truly.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And this is again just something we need to be looking at and pushing for support for her. And we need to put pressure on our end of things so that these things can happen in other places in the world.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to mention a few things that we wanted to talk about today, but we're not able to. So please, I encourage everyone to look these up. There are protests going on in Tunisia, and that's a really important one. There's LGBTQIA plus rights protests going on in Ghana right now. Also a really important thing. And one thing that we could have talked about in length is the Indian protests, the farmer protests that are still ongoing in Delhi. There's still blockades. It's going to be a long-standing protest. And it's something that we've talked about, we've mentioned a couple of times, but not talked about at length. So I wish we had time, but unfortunately we don't. There's all sorts of things going on all around the world. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Joe?
Yes, I wanted to talk about for about the next 120 seconds or so, the situation involving the United States bombing Syria again and again and again. The United States bombed Syria this past weekend. The bombing happened against Iran-backed militias. The rocket attacks killed at least 22 people. The Syrian government condemned the attack, and the USA attacked Syria without any warning or congressional approval. It's amazing how the United States can go ahead and bomb another country without approval, but we have to go through all these hoops and jump through all these obstacles to get a $1,400 checks and $400 a week extra unemployment money. Yeah. Now, this military strike violates international law. And you're probably like, well, Joe, nice. Why does it violate international law? I'll be happy to share that with you. The United Nations Charter, Article 2, Section 4 states that, quote, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United States. Essentially, what's that saying is this. Look, you got to let people know you're going to attack them before you attack them.
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's a war crime. In contrast, Article 51 of the United Nations Charter says, nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right to an individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a state. Translation, if you get attacked, you have the right to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Now look at what happened with this. The United States went ahead based upon whatever intelligence, and I use that phrase facetiously, whatever government intelligence was acquired to bomb Syria. Syria had no knowledge of this bombing, that it was coming. Then Syria had no opportunity to defend themselves. Now, the cost of a Tomahawk missile is $1.87 million. Something that we've talked about on many occasions. We got about 90 seconds left. We've talked about defunding the Pentagon, but more and most importantly, defunding the police. Yes. I can think of a whole lot better ways to spend $1.87 million per missile.
Yeah.
I could spend a whole lot of ways to spend $1.87 million. Yeah. And one great way to spend $1.87 million is food subsidies. We can send out stimulus checks. Or if the federal government just wants to go ahead and make sure the independent media stays strong, they could donate that $1.87 million to the Joe and Cat Chats franchise. Or the Joe Nice Network. What it is, federal government, let's talk.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, it just boils down to economics, and it's something that we're going to continue to talk about because that's the real, thing that is insidious in our global system right now. And again, it's just, yeah, there's a lot more to be said, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you, Joe. As always, you're always a pleasure to talk to you on these chats. And
pleasure's always mine.
Also, I mean, thank you everyone for listening and tuning in. If anyone is live, please take care of yourselves and those around you, and like and share and subscribe on all our socials at Joe and Kat Chats. Bye.